Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday Q&As with the Family Support Team. I think that probably the most frequent question I get from both adults with disabilities and their families is, how can we plan for community living? What are the things we can be doing now so that we'll be ready down the road? Here are some of my fears. How can you help me feel better about that? So without further ado, I want to introduce Emma Burrows and Beth Moeller from our Connect program. Emma, you're new to our Q&As, and I always ask staff to introduce themselves and tell people a little about their journey at the ARC. So what's your roles that you've been in the past, and what's your current role?
My name is Emma Burrows. I am the coordinator of community living, which means that I work in the Connect department, which is an ISLA service, which we'll go into later. I work very closely with Beth, who's been at the ARC forever. I've been with the ARC, I would say a total of almost 4 years, in 2 different spurts. Done some direct support before that. And yeah, I love it here. So I left for a little bit, but I came back and missed it too much.
I am Beth Moeller. I am director of our Connect Community Living program. We help at this time 70 people live in their own apartments or homes all over town, with an additional 8 to 10 people who Emma is helping to get ready to move out into their own place. So I am here to really to support Emma, because she is the new and upcoming expert in the latest things of moving out to your own apartment.
Cool. Well, then I'm going to spend most of my question time on you, Emma. And Beth, when you want to add your 2 cents,
Great.
Just do it, will you?
Sure.
So we already have 5 questions. So I'm going to scrap all the questions I told you I might ask you. We're going to start with the basics, though. If people want to get support for this type of service from the ARC, what makes them eligible?
Yeah, so the Connect program, we serve individuals that reside currently in St. Louis County. Unfortunately, we do not have funding yet in the city or St. Charles or Jefferson County, but we are still working with other agencies who do have funded services in that area. If you live in the St. Louis County area and you are an adult 18 plus with a disability, you would qualify. Now, that is a very big pool of people. And so Beth and I are constantly meeting with people and adding people into our waiting pool and trying to meet everybody. So just because you qualify does not mean that we necessarily have space in the program, but we still would love to get to know you, invite you to a few of our meetups, and then invite you to a few of our either webinars like this or even our virtual meetings, which I can talk about here in a little bit. One of which is the virtual roommate meeting that we host. And that is, again, open to everybody, whether you're in our program or not, whether you're with our agency or not. We host a virtual roommate meeting, I would say quarterly, on average, and people can attend and they'll fill out a roommate profile where they would tell us a little bit about themselves and what they're looking for, whether that's location, budget, type of roommate that you are hoping to have, and so on and so forth. And then we just introduce you to people and hope that you find a good fit.
You must be reading ahead in the Q&A, because there are so many questions about roommates. And I do want to talk about roommates, but before I get there, I do kind of want to talk about where you started, which is the once people have contacted us and are interested in the service, kind of what does that path look like? Somebody might start off and be waiting, but be able to engage with us at a certain level. And then we don't necessarily wait until people have an apartment. We can help them along the way. So can you talk a little bit about that path to getting to your apartment?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are interested in receiving supports with Connect through whether that's pre-ISLA, meaning that you're still looking to move out one day, or ISLA, maybe you've already found your own place. If you were interested in receiving supports, you would reach out to either Beth or I. You can email connect CONNECT@SLARC.org. So go ahead and send us an email. Give us a quick overview of who you are, your name, your age, something that interests you, maybe if you work, what location you're looking to live in. Give us a quick overview of who you are and what you're looking for support with. And we can have a couple of conversations with you, and then potentially add you to our waiting pool.
And then I know at one point, we started serving people kind of almost right when they were ready to move in. So one of the questions we had was like, can you help me get the utilities set up? Can you help me with my budget? Can you talk about, let's say right before somebody is ready to move into an apartment, what are some of the steps you would take with them, Emma?
Yeah, so right before somebody's ready to move in, of course, the first thing I do is I meet somebody where they're at, right? So some people have already created a budget. Some people, maybe they've already talked through a budget or they found a place to live with their family. It really depends on what you're needing support with. So if you wanted support with getting your utilities set up, we could certainly do that. My first recommendation in that case scenario would be that you call whatever place you are planning to move into and ask which utilities you would be responsible for paying. Every single different apartment complex will have different utilities that they cover versus different utilities that you would be responsible for covering, whether that be water, sewer, trash, electric. Some places have gas, some places don't. And then Wi-Fi and or cable if you want it. So there are even some apartments that limit which users or what sorts of services you can go through to get Wi-Fi and or cable. So maybe it's just AT&T, maybe it's just Spectrum. Maybe you have it built in already and you don't even need to worry about that. Whatever you would need help with getting set up, depending on your specific situation, that's what we could help with.
Okay, and how early can you start working with somebody?
Yeah, so we ideally start to meet with people when they are about 1 year out from looking to move. So if somebody is thinking about moving one day, maybe you are somebody that like, let's say that you've just graduated from high school or you've gone through some sort of collegiate program, or maybe you've just been living with mom and dad and, you know, you're turning a certain age and you're like, gosh, like I really have friends and peers that are living on their own and I think I could do this too. Once you get to that point where you feel like you are financially stable enough and able to be successful and safe with living independently, that's when we want to start meeting with you.
What are some of the things that surprise people about the budget when you start to meet with them?
Yeah, so how much rent can be is huge. That is a great question. Yeah, rent is very expensive. I would say that for probably anybody on this call, anybody's parents, families, family members, you can probably assume that rent, mortgage, cost of living is the biggest line item in everybody's budget. A lot of people will reference, it's an old budget rule, but reference an old budget rule that says that you should spend 30% of your income or less on housing. Now that's not a hard science, right? Some people spend a little bit more than that. Some people will spend a little bit less. It really just depends on your situation. But it is the biggest piece of your budget is your rent.
Beth, do you have anything you'd like to toss in? Any other surprises that people don't seem to realize they need to tackle?
So rent is a big item. Thinking through having a roommate can lessen that significantly, you know, cut your expenses in half. It's really a topic of conversation with your parents. And, you know, it's complicated. So many people we support get some financial support from their parents. And so talking about what that looks like. It's different for everybody. There are some subsidized apartments, and some is probably the wrong term to use. It's probably more like
You,
a few minimal, but they do happen. It's kind of the unicorn, like it happens, but don't depend on it. So it's a big thing to discuss.
well, thank you for segueing right back to the roommates, because I think this is a good time to dig into that. You know, a lot of people would think they would prefer to live alone, but then sometimes folks get lonely. Sometimes they really would prefer to live alone, but it's very costly to do that. So we've got a lot of questions about roommates, some of which you answered, because we have a questionnaire to kind of help people prioritize what they're looking for in a roommate. And so they can kind of check that, look at other people and check those boxes. And we have a roommate meetup. Are there other things that people can do to maybe pick out what roommate they're going to be able to get along with better, or address some conflict issues that might come up?
Great questions. So first and foremost, my biggest recommendation with a roommate, before you are even thinking about moving in with somebody, is to explore your options. Let's pretend like I'm looking for a roommate right now, and Beth and I and Sharon hop on this virtual roommate meeting, and it's these three people right here. And I hear that, well, Beth wants to live in the same location that I do, and maybe Sharon wants to live a little bit farther away. Well, my first inclination shouldn't be, okay, well, my roommate's going to be Beth, because I haven't really gotten to know Beth yet. Just because we have one thing in common does not mean that we will get along entirely. And so my biggest recommendation is just spending time with that person. Maybe you ease into it by spending time with them virtually to start. You just start to have conversations. What is it that we're interested in? What does our typical daily routine look like? Do we work? Do we like to stay at home? Do we like to have friends over? Are we somebody that is very clean, or are we somebody that might be a little bit more cluttery? Just talking through all of the things that make you you, and then also potentially introducing your family and or friends to that person, especially if they are an important part of your life. Introducing folks before deciding that you're going to move in with somebody is essential. Then weighing your options and not limiting it to one person, exploring your options, meeting new people, continuing to put it out there, whether that's in our virtual roommate meetings or at your work, or maybe you're a part of like a YMCA or a religious group or something like that. Any social networks that you're in, just kind of throwing it out there that, hey, like I'm thinking about moving out and I might need a roommate, or I might want a roommate. Do you know anybody? And continuing to ask people.
That makes me think of another question. If I feel like my best roommate match is a person without a disability, can you still come in and help me out with some of the things I need to live independently?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So we have a question about how do we help navigate roommate conflict?
Great question. I will say that we help to navigate roommate conflict with the people that are in our program and that we are supporting. And just start by saying that, because I do want to make it clear that if somebody is having an issue with their roommate and we might not know your situation or know who you are, it might be more challenging for me to give advice. So I just personally want to make it clear that, we might need some context if we're going to help. And then everybody's different. I know that I keep going back to that, but different conflict may resolve different ways. One way that I personally like to approach it to start is by having the 2 or 3 or however many roommates there are meet with a staff person that would be kind of like a mediator in the conversation. And we start with something that we are usually something that we're doing well, a reason why we like our roommate, or a reason why we want to be on the same team as our roommate, right? And so after we remind ourselves of those positive things that we really do like, then we talk about, okay, well, what is it that's going wrong? And what is it that somebody might be having, you know, an issue with or some trouble with? And then we try to find a compromise in the middle of whatever two opinions there are, other ways that things can work.
Do you have any people that you support that choose to have sort of house rules?
Yeah, absolutely. It actually would be a great idea that if you're really serious about moving in with somebody, you could even create sort of like a roommate contract, and I could help you with those questions to think through before moving in with somebody. Could be little things like what temperature do we keep the thermostat at in the middle of the summer, and what temperature do we keep it at in the middle of the winter? It could be bigger things like how much are we going to let the sink pile up with dishes before one of us gets to cleaning it? It could be even a whole routine and schedule of who does vacuuming and trash and dishes and all of that, and at what time. Some people like a lot of that structure and some people don't. And either one is totally okay. But thinking through really what that might look like between you.
So I would just add to that, over the years, the things that I have seen conflict about, like being clear as you can be if you've never lived with somebody, but realistic expectations of how much is your roommate going to be your friend and how much is they just your roommate and they're paying half the bills and, you know, keeping up with half of the chores. So just sharing your expectations around that, and then also rules around, can you have overnight guests, or can you have, like, is there a time by which guests need to leave if you're having people over? Those sorts of things that if you can agree upon it beforehand, then it prevents hard feelings, rather than, oh, you know, my sister is going to come spend the week with us, and, you know, somebody be furious and somebody be really hurt.
Yeah.
Good clarification. That was a great answer. I think that'll be really helpful to a lot of people. So we have a question. Do you people usually just have one roommate or more than one? And what about pets?
Good
I would think
question.
finding a more than a 2-bedroom apartment would be more challenging.
It can be. It can also save money on rent if you're able to find more than one roommate. I will say that finding a roommate is challenging unless you've already got somebody in mind. Maybe it's somebody that you know from high school, or somebody that you know through one of your organizations or social circles. Usually people do only have one roommate. I've seen it though, where there's 2, or even I've had 3 roommates. Some context, I've moved 9 times over the last like 11, 12 years. And I've had several different roommates within that time. A huge reason why I had my own roommates is because I needed it to be able to afford independent living. In terms of how many roommates, I mean, I think that it is harder to find a higher number of roommates, but if you really need to save that money, or if you have people in mind already, it's not a bad idea. And it is possible to find 3-bedroom homes or 4-bedroom places. It just might be a little bit more challenging. In terms of pets, I mean, that is going to add a whole new mixture to the ball game. Pets, there are so many extra questions that you would want to ask. If you are planning to bring a pet, like Beth said, making sure that that is very, very clear, clearly communicated not only to your potential roommates, but also to the landlord and wherever you're renting from. Some apartment complexes will allow pets and some will not. Some will also have weight or size or breed restrictions on pets, and others won't. Many of them, if they do allow pets, will charge either a pet deposit or a pet fee. Those two things are kind of different than one another. Deposit means that you're going to give somebody a handful of, not a handful, a certain amount of money that they clarify. And the deposit would be given back to you pending that you kept the place in good condition. Your pet didn't ruin anything in the house, whether it's your dog scratching the door, and then you were following the general pet rules of the property. A pet fee is a little bit different in that you would just give them that money to have that pet there. The other thing to think about is things with cats or dogs or any sort of animal, really. When you're thinking about having roommates and a pet, is this something that you are solely responsible for taking care of, or is this pet, are you expecting your roommates to help out? And if you are expecting your roommates to help out, do they get any sort of thing in return? Is there something that you do to help them a little bit more with their life? Or do they get a little bit cheaper rent because they're walking your dog once a day? Different options and different things for different people.
I would just say, if you're listening to this and you are thinking that maybe in 2 or 3 years you want to move out, I would work on building my communication skills. I would take some conflict resolution classes. I would work on just being able to set boundaries and communicate clearly about what I wanted, because almost everything Emma's talked about has been about good communication, solving the problem. So we're going to do rapid fire Q&A because we have so many questions. A lot of these are logistical, so I think they can be answered relatively quickly. How long is the waiting pool typically? And I know that you guys handle that a little differently than just kind of first come, first serve. Is there really an answer, Beth?
I will tackle that. We have a waiting pool, so our funding is for 75 people to live on their own, as well as 8 in the pre-ISLA program. And so we're somewhat at capacity. If a person wants to live nearby the people we already support, it's much easier for us to move that person in because we already have resources in place. If it's completely a different neighborhood and a different thing, then all bets are off at how long it is going to take. We're really trying to leverage our staff and our resources to make it sustainable.
And we're a little bit smaller program than some of the others, so you might be able to move more quickly into another program if that's something that you feel would meet your needs. Is there an average or typical range for rent in our market today?
Yeah, great question. I will say it depends on the area that you're looking to live in. When I am on apartments.com or Zillow or Trulia or HotPads, there's so many different resources you can use. I'm always looking on the maps and finding an average within that area. I will say, just from my knowledge, this is not a fact, but from what I've seen, I will estimate that the average 1-bedroom in St. Louis County is probably close to $800 or $900 a month, maybe a little bit more if you're looking in nicer areas, maybe a little bit less if you're looking in areas that are farther off the beaten path or whatever that may be. And then for 2 bedrooms, they're going to be usually closer to $1,200, maybe $1,300 or $1,400, sometimes even upwards of $1,800. So it really just depends on where you're looking in terms of location. It depends on what sort of amenities the apartment has, whether that be washer, dryer, and unit, or fancier things like a pool.
All right, thank you.
I would add to that apartment communities in general are a little more expensive. If you can find a mom and pop, a family owned apartment that might rent for less, You might find that on Craigslist or just because there's a sign out in front. So driving around the area where you're thinking you might want to live could be a little cheaper.
So we have a Facebook question that I'm going to answer about where would we find classes on communication and conflict resolution? And I will say that we've got a couple options here at the ARC, and there's other community options, but I mean, you can certainly go to a community college and find those kinds of classes. We have a program called Next, which is to help people build their independent living skills. It's got a 9-pillar curriculum, and there's 3 semesters of classes that we offer during the course of a year that include some of the social skills components of that. There's other agencies that do independent living skill training that can include some of that. And then Emma and Beth will also work on some pre-ISLA programming, which could include some of those things. So we got a couple of questions about kind of the logistics of delivering ISLA supports. If we have 2 people living together that are both eligible for funding, can you maximize that support by having them receive their services at different times so that staff's in there a little more frequently figuring out what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we've got a question, I'm going to kind of roll this into, it says, are there any affordable housing in the Baldwin, Ellisville, Manchester area? I was hoping, Beth, maybe you could talk about our idea of kind of clustered living to maximize the support we can provide to people and how we've done that in Baldwin specifically.
Sure. So we have 7 people living at Kensington West apartment community, using that idea that if people are living in the same community, we can leverage the amount of support from staff. It is not a cheap place to live. So a 1-bedroom apartment is about $1,200. The least expensive place in Baldwin that I know of is Baldwin Manor. I honestly don't know what the going rate there is, but they're all 1 bedroom. There's nothing fancy about it. Emma, anything else that's less expensive out there?
Yeah, in terms of affordable housing, my recommendation for places in Baldwin in that area is really just to drive around your neighborhood and look at buildings that you think might look like apartments and see if there's ever a sign that says leasing on it, or a contact number with the apartment on there.
So this is an interesting question. They're asking if, if in addition to your apartment lease, is there any kind of lease or formal agreement with the ARC about the types of support we're going to provide?
Just someone's support plan. We put together a plan for each person of what we're going to do, what family does, what the person individually is responsible for. So it's not really a contract, but it spells out what each person is doing.
Right. So if we've had somebody that was eligible for this service in the past, became very comfortable and independent in their apartment, but wanted to make a change to a new apartment or switch roommates, would they be able to re-establish services?
Absolutely.
So somebody asked at the very beginning, and I've been waiting to ask it, but they said, can I move into St. Louis County and then ask for help to find a roommate for the other bedroom? And I wanted to kind of just expand on that question and say, people could currently be living in the city or St. Charles, but could come into your program if their choice is to live in St. Louis County and have an apartment there, correct?
Yes.
Or a home there. Is there any way that you would support them to, if they can afford to move to a 2-bedroom apartment and then look for a roommate, would you just offer the same resources we already talked about?
Yes.
Okay.
I will say, just because something meets qualifications, right? Don't jump on something like that because it might make you qualify. Reach out to us first and start having those conversations with us first.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't just move into St. Louis County and then hope to get the services. So If you're getting services for Pre-ISLA, another organization, you certainly could do the virtual connect stuff on Meetup. And you could test us out and see whether or not, some other organizations do Pre-ISLA training, but they don't actually have a residential service. So once you need to shift to get the service, you're going to maybe want to see what the ARC is like, see what another organization is like. So I'd say yes. So one of the questions on here is whether we assist with independent travel for people with disabilities. And I guess I wanted to just touch on that briefly. Depending on the type of residential supports we're offering, we are able to kind of help navigate travel. How do you guys handle that when someone you support needs some help on a trip?
Yeah, so transportation is a huge barrier to independent living. It's something that I talk about with every single person I meet with. We as a program are not able to provide transportation all the time. We do provide some limited transportation when staff is there for the minimal hours they're there per week. And that may look like things like grocery shopping, or it may look like going to a social event, or it may be going to, this week I'm going to end up taking somebody to go renew their Call-A-Ride application so that they can access Call-A-Ride for their transportation through the majority of the year. I will say too that Sharon, you actually had one of these Q&As with Metro ADA. They are a fabulous resource, so great to work with. I know that transportation in St. Louis is not easy. I know that it presents its challenges. All of that being said, and I saw somebody just talk about VIA. There are so many resources that are out there through Metro ADA. And if you go on their website, they'll have more information on that. There's Metro travel training. There's things like VIA. There are things other than travel training. There's also reduced fare. There's the Metro on the way with ADA card for free bus fare. Like there's so many resources that are out there. So depending on the individual, their confidence, their abilities, and where they're trying to go. I mean, maybe it's that I can take the bus to my local McDonald's down the road because I love going there, but maybe I don't want to take the bus all the way out to the Enterprise Center for a Blues game, or whatever that may be. If you can get a couple of trips done with one resource and then a couple of other trips done with a different resource, that's how we help navigate through that.
So I'm so glad you talked about transportation, because I think that's one of those things that as a service, we've really tried to focus on skill building and planning, because in the past, many years ago, we used to drive people a lot of places. And when we do that, we use all our hours being transportation services instead of really helping people learn how to be more independent by making their favorite meal at home or solving that conflict with their roommates. So we try not to do as much transportation, but guide people to the resources. I do want to kind of stay in this area though and talk about travel outside of St. Louis. If somebody's going to take a vacation, how are you all able to support somebody to prepare and go on a trip?
I mean, we would be happy to, whether that is going to the airport and physically walking in and showing you around and, making sure that you're comfortable, or making sure you know how to recognize the employees that are there to help you. Maybe it's the color of shirt that they're wearing. Maybe it's that we call in advance and say, hey, I may need some support with finding my gate, or I may need some support with getting into a seat. We can help call the right people, find the right people to call, and get that information for you.
And am I correct that in certain cases, people have private paid for us to assist to go on a vacation with them?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah, so anything's possible. It may not fall within the realm of the available funding, but we're happy to negotiate those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Lauren asked a question that I think I have an answer for, but I'd be curious what you said. She says, how do you spend time with a roommate if your roommate's schedule different from yours? And I'm thinking that might be a roommate that's just a roommate, not a friend. So what's your thoughts, Emma?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you make time and people make time for the things that they want to make time for, right? And sometimes people are very, very busy. If people are busy and they have higher priorities like paying their bills and getting to work, or things just don't line up, then yeah, it sounds like that would just be a roommate that you're cordial and friendly with when you happen to be around each other. Maybe it's that you discuss your schedule with work with the roommate, and you find 1 hour of time where you can watch a TV show together, right before somebody's going to bed or right before somebody's hopping on the bus or whatever that may be. Maybe it's that you find creative ways to spend time together even while you guys are both busy. So maybe it's like, hey, we do 1 hour of cleaning at the same time. I focus in the kitchen and you focus in the living room. Finding creative ways to have fun and make things that you're going to have to do as roommates together anyway fun. That would be my recommendation there.
That's a great idea. And once again, it's about saying what you need and having a conversation and being willing to compromise. So I love those things. I will say I have friends that live out of town, and we also use Marco Polo, the app where we can send videos to each other. And that can be a way to get to know somebody before you move in with them. And that might be something fun to use. Last question, I think, and thank you so much, Emma, for staying on with us. Let's go down to our teens where the parents are thinking, okay, it's getting closer than I'd like it to be. How can I prepare my teen so that when he's ready to move out and have a roommate, he's ready? What are some of the most important things? I will talk about some programs and resources too. So you start us.
Sure. So one of the first things I would recommend is to really take inventory, make a list of the things that you do with or for your child every single day. Maybe that's transportation, maybe it's laundry, maybe it's cooking, and try and find little ways that they can start to be more responsible for those things themselves. Some of that sounds very commonplace for a lot of people. They're like, oh, they're already doing their laundry and they're already cooking and I can leave them alone for overnights on their own for 2 or 3 days. Well, in that case scenario, maybe it's that when your child does come to you with a question about something with home ownership or living independently, this is challenging because it's challenging for me too. But rather than just giving them the answer and telling them exactly what to do, my recommendation is to take a pause and say, that's a good question. Even if you know the answer, let's try and figure that out together. Like, let's try and solve this, let's try and figure this out. Because inevitably, with independent living, things like a fuse is going to break, right? And they're going to have to know how to find the fuse box. Maybe their dish disposal gets caught and they have to hit the reset button on the bottom. Maybe, I don't know, their ice maker stops working. There's tons of different things that will happen. Yeah, so there are going to be things that happen that pop up with independent living. And so the more that we can do to encourage problem solving and reaching out and being clear about what you need to your natural support network, that's what I would encourage. I actually have a good friend who I'm pretty sure one of them just put a note in the chat, or maybe it was their sibling. But for example, they were having a problem with their ice maker and they weren't quite sure what to do. They just knew that it wasn't making ice. Well, they called me and they said they knew to call me when something was wrong, right? And they said, my refrigerator's broken. And I said, okay, tell me more. And I said, are the lights out? Like, what's going on? And then we did some problem solving and we were able to contact maintenance together. Those things will happen. And so
such a perfect story. I love hearing that. And if moms and dads out there, if that sounds really stressful to you, to step back and try and let your kids tackle some of those things, figure them out, maybe fall on their faces and have a problem. I highly recommend our Joys and Parent Powerhouse workshop, where we really help you to think about why it's important to step away from the caregiving roles as your kids grow up, and how you can support yourself when you feel that tension and anxiety, and how you can build your ability to take a pause and ask coaching questions so that they can start figuring out, okay, it's the apartment maintenance guy who's going to help me with this problem. So we also have a lot of different classes, again, through that next curriculum to help you move forward. And always self-determination and communication can be helpful for your kids so that they're able to speak up about what they want, but also understand that to get here, I'm going to need to plan, and kind of being able to set that trajectory for what they want for the future is really important. Emma, I'm going to let you wrap things up and we'll go from here.
Awesome. I do just want to add two things. One of which is that there is a lot of anxiety and apprehension that comes with talking about independent living for every single family. You're not alone. And it happens with, I would say, not only the population of individuals that we serve, but also neurotypical population, right? Imagine sending your child or your best friend off to go live somewhere else in a different city. There's always going to be apprehension there and nerves. But it's really been incredible working in this field and seeing how much people can accomplish, and how much people will do and can do when they're just challenged a little bit, and put out of their comfort zone.
If you go on meetup.com and complete your profile, you can look for Emma and her programs at Connect at St. Louis ARG. Have a great week, everybody.